Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. With this video, I'll be reviewing Acquisitions Incorporated, designed by Wizards of the Coast and Penny Arcade Inc. and adapted by Roll20. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Crazy Pat, and Nick. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Numa, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. As you know, or should know if you follow my channel and listen to my various ramblings on video logs and whatnot, I'm a pretty big fan of Acquisitions Incorporated. I have been listening and then eventually watching their adventures for years and years now. I think, it's probably been 7 or 8 years. And I remember they started doing, when Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition was a thing, it was kind of a big, like, cross-promotional kind of a test they did, which is to have these, semi-famous, I don't even know if they were considered big celebrities at that point. I guess PAX was a thing back then, so that was decently famous kind of nerd, geeky celebrities playing D&D with the Penny Arcade duo and Scott Kurtz. And it just grew from there. They kept doing it, and it just got more and more popular, and dare I say, helped pave the way for Dungeons & Dragons popularity in general today. I don't think it was like the thing that got me into D&D necessarily. There was a number of factors that I won't go into necessarily, but certainly was a primary motivator for eventually running our own permanent, ongoing, live-streamed series, and certainly that kind of more jokey, lighthearted, but still telling a good story, lots of good characters. All those things are definitely the theme and tone that I try to hold true to when I do Dungeons & Dragons as a DM. So I wanted to preface all this by saying I am a pretty big fan of Acquisitions Incorporated. I also listen to and watch the C Team, although my wife's an even bigger fan of the C Team. I usually have to ask her what's going on in a lot of things. But I wanted you to know that because I'm going to open this review by saying this book is incredible. I am such a huge fan of the adventure that is presented in the official Acquisitions Inc. D&D book. Such a huge fan that I think, in my mind, it officially surpasses Lost Mine of Phandelver as my favorite go-to recommendation for a beginning D&D 5th edition campaign, specifically a low-level campaign, because it goes from level 1 through 6, which is a little beyond what Phandelver does, but definitely fits that mold of definitely not a full arcing campaign for a full character's career growth, but certainly a great low-level campaign. And I think it's just so good. It's so well written. It's got just the amazing characters, the really funny humor, just things that flip expectations on characters and their motivations and traps and things. It's so well designed. I cannot say enough good things about it. So we're going to get into this review, but just know that I think that the adventure included here is my favorite adventure that I've ever read from 5th edition adventure. And again, if you know all the things I've done, this is obviously not my first Roll20 review. I've reviewed all of the official 5th edition D&D adventures. We've played a bunch of them, and I've reviewed a lot of material on the DM's Guild. This is probably my single favorite adventure that I've seen. High praise. Alright, the following content is included in the $49.95 Acquisitions Incorporated Roll20 module. And again, let me preface this by saying, 'cause a lot of people tend to not quite get this on the comments, I'm specifically reviewing the Roll20 adaptation and not necessarily the book itself, although obviously I will mention features the book gives. But because it's a Roll20 module, I'm going to be primarily reviewing the adventure, because that's really what you're buying this for if you're going to buy it on Roll20. You can get all the lore stuff and all of that just by getting the book itself. Yes, you can integrate a few of the things in the Roll20's character monster, which is cool, but if you're buying this on Roll20, you're buying it for the adventure. There's no other reason why you should buy this. And thankfully, I'm here to tell you the adventure is really, really good. All right. So what is included in the bundle is one new race, the Verdin, which are kind of like mutated goblin creatures. 7 new spells, 5 new player backgrounds, new role-playing quirk tables for each class, very similar to how Xanathars, I believe, set this up, where they had just like here's your fighting styles, and there's like a D10 of styles. It has like a couple. It has like 2 of those for like every single class. So just kind of additional role-playing tools, I guess is what I would call them. An entire chapter on using AC Inc. franchises in your campaign, including 8 multi-tiered company positions. For those of you that know Acquisitions Inc., these would be like the Documancer, the Hordes person, all those different what do you call them? Expanded player options, I guess, backgrounds. And then the Ori of the Wanderer adventure, which is probably about 2/3 of the book in terms of content. That adventure includes 12 5-foot square battle maps with token and dynamic lighting. That is a really impressive amount of maps for a relatively smaller, shorter campaign. And all the maps are perfectly scaled, full color, detail, everything. Ugh, amazing. 2 non-gridded town and region maps, 1 alphabetized token page. You get the journal divided into 5 episodes containing all the notes and handouts that you need. Over 30 named NPCs, including, of course, all the famous members of AC Inc. and the C Team and the Villainous B Team. Over 100 generic monster sheets and tokens, and 49 magic item handouts, 17 with pictures. That's a lot of content. It is a full-priced campaign book, and the campaign isn't quite as long as other campaigns, so I was glad to see you get a lot of extra things here. And the best way I can show that off is this is the kind of overarching compendium source book right here, which has everything neatly organized by table. So for example, you want to see what the new company positions are, like the Documancer. You can click the link. You can wait a second while it opens. The next link. Waiting. There we go. Nice, of course, artwork by Microhulic throughout the entire product, and it just includes some nice detail. And these are similar to what you get with the class specific class rules too. All these tables. You get the abilities. There are different ranks you can get within all of these equipments. All of these new player options for companies. If you're going to run this adventure, you're probably the adventure includes the fact that you are going to be starting your own AC Inc. franchise, so you will get the option to dole out these what are they called? Faction features, I guess is what they're called, to your players. So you get a chance to actually use all these built into the adventure, which is very cool. But this is more than just a simple like player background where it has like the one little paragraph of like, hey, you know how to like change your name or ask for contacts or something. This is a lot more involved than that. So I would say it's much more interesting and involved player background options, which come into play a lot in the C Team, and these are obviously built directly out of that. So very nice to see on those. And then that is the entire chapter 2 is all about these. How to use your new. Assuming you want to use AC Inc., but you could really apply this to any kind of headquarters that you want to use. There's downtime activities, which between each episode, there is a chance to basically do your own activities, follow up with like business contacts, really just kind of feel for your players and how they're working with the adventure, and how much you want to run with that. There's a lot of like side quests and NPCs that players can do and just follow up on in order to build their own franchise, and all of those rules are used in Chapter 2. So I really like the way that it plays into the adventure that is Chapter 4. Chapter 3 are all the additional player options. So you've got your new race, the Verdin. I guess we can look at those for a second. These are kind of these mutated goblins. Really good art, as I mentioned. Nothing terribly excited there. They're just good-natured goblin folk. You get new spells, which are mainly ones that Jim Darkmagic made up throughout his career, like Jim's Magic Missile. The new role-playing quirk tables, let's go to like Bard, for example. They'll have like a table of insults. So like a D20 table of insults for your Bard. It's just kind of stuff like that, where it's kind of fun and funny. Not necessarily any of it is actually like mechanics-based, which reminds me much more of the Xanathar. Part of Xanathars was adding new archetypes and subclasses, but then there was a preface section that just added some kind of flavoring to each class, and this is very much that. So it just gives you additional flavors and ways to use your class, which is fun. I think it's a good add. That's pretty much all that's in chapter. Oh, and new player backgrounds, the 5 ones there. So like gambler, failed merchant, and a lot of these obviously can play into the campaign very well. Also because they have to deal with the franchise opportunity. All right, if you can't tell, I'm very excited to get to the adventure because it's so freaking good. It's such a good adventure. The level 1 dungeon alone is incredible. It does everything takes place in the Sword Coast, as you can see here with this really, really lovely map. I believe this is the same. I think it might be the same artist that did the Out of the Abyss and maybe Storm King's Thunder maps, because it kind of has that same aesthetic to it in terms of the map designs. But it takes place around the Sword Coast region. You will go to Phandalin, you will go to Neverwinter, and you will go to Waterdeep. I think there's a side trek in Luskan as well. You really go all the way around. Red Larch is, of course, the finale where the Drawn-in Courtier is. The whole Sword Coast region. So that I assumed was going to be the case because Acq is very much baked into what D&D 5th edition is right now, which is primarily 90% taking place around this region of the Sword Coast, so that part is fine. It's a really cool map to go with it. Every single episode has at least a couple dungeon maps to go along, which is really cool. Of course, it starts out with your characters meeting with Omen in Waterdeep. Omen is a masked lord, or isn't he? And there's a really funny dialogue sequence where, of course, you should be very thankful for meeting with Omen. Walnut comes up as a member of the C team and says, oh, this is a great honor. So they front load a lot of the character interactions, and your team is basically mistakenly believed to be an experienced adventuring party. A giant sinkhole is opened up in Waterdeep, and your team is sent to investigate it. And when they investigate it, they end up fighting this magical artifact that has been split up into, the Ori, has been split up into, it's like a little clockwork device, split into various pieces that then your party has to go around and collect. So it's a really solid, kind of cliche start to a campaign in terms of you get all these giant, powerful, magical artifacts that you have to then bring together. And of course, it's revealed that the villain is also trying to bring them together. Infinity Stones, whatever you want to use for this kind of plot device. But I think it works, and it works really well. And of course, at the end, you have to then pretty much destroy them, and they're used against you and all that good stuff. But the first dungeon alone is so good. I love it. This Sinkhole Tunnel dungeon. And it's all level 1, which is impressive that they can stretch level 1 this long. It's just a series of basically rooms within these tunnels. And I like the way this is designed in that it's not just a big snaking tunnel, because that's a hard thing to do in a Roll20 dungeon. When you're working with dynamic lighting, and you work from room to room in a standard dungeon, like a crypt or a mansion or something, then obviously doors are your sight blockers. Well, in a cave system, it can be really awkward if you have players that are just running ahead and seeing things that you don't necessarily want them to see yet. So I like the way that this is used, in that you can literally just basically put the players in the GM layer, move them to a new whatever next section they're in. It even says Area 1, Area 2, Area 3. Plop them in there, let them solve that trap, that puzzle, that combat encounter, and then they can move out, and then they just end up in the next area. This is a really good solution to doing tunnels. I would like to see like every advanced tunnel system in Roll20 dungeon design use this system. I think it's very, very cool. You can see here the way the traps work. These are actually on the GM layer, so the players do not see these traps, but you, the DM, do. And you can always put them on the token layer so the players can then see them once they are revealed. A couple of them do fire damage. There's a pit in the middle. There's one that just teleports you inside to this mummy chamber, although of course they are using the zombie stat blocks because they're level 1 players. And then those players start off like mummified, and then they have to get up and like act like a mummy around the other mummies. It's so good. It's so good. There's a classic giant spider here with a bunch of cocooned people. They can find a goblin that they can befriend, which is very much reminiscent of the goblin that players can find in the Phandelver, the Manor dungeon in Phandalin, if they want to befriend the helpful goblin. There is a brass dragon wormling the players can rescue from a pair of dark mantles who's trapped under the rubble. When this sinkhole gave in, it was fleeing an attack by a young green dragon, and the players can actually get the aid of a brass dragon ally in here. So look at this encounter right here. They cross along. In fact, there's a handout. This one right here. It's a great picture. as the players have to step out onto this ledge, and of course this classic tentacle comes. It's a sewer system that's got a small opening to the plane of filth, and of course as the players go across this edge circle, this giant tentacle comes out and tries to grab them and drag them down into this pool of water. Just absolutely fantastic, a great visual. There's a bunch of crawling claws, statted as severed feet, that are teleported down here, and there's a giant Bigfoot that stomps them down. That doesn't stop until the players kill all these feet. This is just the level 1 dungeon. There's so many just awesome things throughout this dungeon, and I absolutely love it to death. So many cool, memorable encounters just in the level 1 dungeon alone. And then when they get to the end, they find one of the city watch guards has been possessed by the altar, which is the Ori that the players find. This other character found the Ori, tried to destroy it on the altar, and the altar instead killed him and basically activated a defense mechanism. So it's up to... And you can see, look at all the way it's annotated, too. You can even see where players are. Weirdly enough, Roll20 doesn't put a lot of the tokens on the map on the GM layer this time around, whereas in previous campaigns they do. Usually they'd be like in a corner or just hiding on the GM layer, but this time instead they just have the arrows here. And the one maybe negative here is because there's so many named NPCs that are used. Obviously there's not art for a lot of those NPCs, so it like using like this character of Corporal Tishi is just like the generic guard looking character or something, you know, and you'll come across that issue quite a few times where they'll either basically just using the generic portrait from like the monster manual. So that you probably run into that problem where you might have to make your own tokens or just pretend like, hey, this person doesn't look like that. There's not a real good solution to that, and I feel for Roll20 on that one because obviously they can't make all these, just unless they do want to make all these original art assets for this adventure, but because it uses so many named NPCs, it gets a little tricky whenever you use like the generic monster tokens. So for example, Corporal Tishi is the veteran stat block, which is this one. And by the way, if you don't know, if you haven't bought a module on Roll20 yet, all of these monster tokens you can just drag and drop, and it instantly becomes what you need. I'm zoomed out way in. Let's zoom back in. But the problem is here, like Corporal Tishi uses this stat block, which has this as the token, obviously a dude. So, and Tishi's a woman. So it gets a little weird in that regard. You could try and use your own custom tokens to change it around, or just do this and say like, hey, this is actually this character. I don't know what the best solution to that is, but that's one situation you might come up with because this adventure is very good about using specific named NPCs. But I love this dungeon to death. It's done so well. After that, they find the Ori. That's actually really a tease for the future, for the current campaign, and then they're sent off on their next adventure to Phandalin. That's all episode 1, and it uses the milestone leveling. So at the end of every episode, they actually level up. So that entire dungeon crawl through the Sinkhole tunnels beneath Waterdeep was level 1. They're then told to go to Phandalin and investigate what happened to the Inc. franchise in Phandalin for level 2. Now, if you have played Lost Mine of Phandelver, and more than likely you have, if you've played any D&D 5th edition, you instantly recognize Phandalin as the setting of that adventure. This one takes place 5 years afterwards, which is cool. I believe this is the exact same map that's used, and unfortunately, it also uses an exact same dungeon from that campaign, from the Lost Mine of Phandelver. The Trezendar Manor dungeon is the same basic map, and then obviously there's new tokens and things within that map. There's some new art assets there, but it's the same design. I have mixed feelings about that. I'm basically negative on that because it just feels like a little bit of reusing assets to me. I would have liked to see, I don't know, it reminds me of like, you know, playing Dragon Quest, Dragon Age 2 and seeing like, you know, the same cave design but with like one wall shut off and another one open. You know, they use like the same layout. It just doesn't really sit well with me and doesn't quite work as well. So while I appreciate the fact that there is a lot of new content in Phandalin and the fact that it takes place years afterwards, and there are some new additions, could be interesting for a party, especially if you use like the cinematic universe like that we use in terms of the shared universe and events do happen. So like in our campaign, Storm King's Thunder did happen, Prince of the Apocalypse did happen, and all these different regions are still recovering from all those catastrophic events, and the Phandelver event happened. So That part could be interesting. Like in this case, Silder Hall Winter, those events did happen to him. He got out of it, but he is like a harried man, and he's trying to run for town mayor against Harbin Wester, who's still in town. A few of the town members are still here. There's also some new ones. It's like I said, this is probably the only chapter where I'm a little ho hum about because it's just a little bit more standard, and I've seen it all before. I ran Lost Mine of Fendover, and I've reviewed it, so I've seen a lot of it. And it is Phandalin, and it is the Trezendarm, which is the Red Brand hideout, I believe. And if you've played Lost Mine of Fendover, you instantly recognize this map. It is the exact same map with a few new additions. So there's less, instead of the tables and chairs in 10, there's a portal that is summoning gibbering mouthers, for example. Instead of a Nothic in the middle, there's just a bunch of trash with swarms of insects down in this like gorge. So it is different. There's some interesting parts about it. I love this section right here. The pit is now open, but it's got some corpses hanging above it, which is creepy. And they're actually scarecrows that try to grab people and then throw them into the pit, which is a really neat encounter design. So there's some neat stuff going on here, but I was disappointed that it is basically the same map, just repurposed in a different way. They find the one survivor of the Ak Inc. franchise, who then leads them to the next clue, which is to go to this lighthouse where the other survivor then teleported to. And each of these events, they're gathering, the Infinity Stones, or in this case, the pieces of the Ori, to gather together, and they soon discover that the villain is after them as well. Although the villain, which is Spurgoth, I believe, the goblin that is from a previous Ak Inc. story, who was left for dead and came back as a really fun reoccurring villain in the Ak Inc. storyline, is the villain of this campaign, and he is doing his best to destroy Acquisitions Incorporated, but he's also trying to lay the blame at Drawn Enterprises, which is another rival franchise. The players initially think that Drawn Enterprises is the villain. The Lighthouse is a smaller location, but fun. It gives a chance for... I'm going to actually skip the Lighthouse map and go to the basement. There's a really neat encounter here with a Mad Gnome Wizard who has the ability to turn people into undead, and he is currently turning the person you're looking for into like a vampire spawn. She's strapped to the table. There's another gnome he's using as his like mindless zombie pet. There's a bunch of the Modrons around the area. He's got like a giant keg, Mecha Chimera golem thing to attack the players with. It's a really neat encounter that's meant to be where the players can actually work with him and not have to fight him, because he has actually the Archmage stat block, and at this point the players are level 3. Also, what's really fun throughout these episodes is there are really interesting side tracks. There are two main big ones that I really glommed onto, and one of them is a mutiny. Just when they basically arrive at the lighthouse to do the dungeon, there's then a group of pirates on a rowboat nearby who are being attacked by giant octopi, and the players can fight them off and then learn that they are basically trying to escape I guess they're on assignment from their current pirate captain, but they want to mutiny against him, and the players can join those pirates, go back to the ship, and literally fight this mutiny. It's just a complete sidetrack, but it sounds really, really fun. It's a cool way for the players to get involved in this pirate mutiny adventure. And then in episode 4, no, it's actually it's still part of 3 when they do the detour to Neverwinter. On their way to the lighthouse, Omen basically tells them to stop by Neverwinter, talk to a shape changer, and let her drop off the loot that she's been acquiring. It's a doppelganger, sorry, the D&D shape changer. The loot that she's acquiring, and that's all you have to do is basically just work this contact. And it turns out she's been arrested for a crime that she didn't commit, and the players are basically given this open-ended. And this is a lot. Look at that. This is all this one thing I'm talking about. The players are given this long open-ended sequence where they can try to break this person out of prison. They can bribe guards. They can go to like the city council. There's all kinds of. There's no map for any of this. It's just all sidetrack, but it's really well detailed. There's a lot of interesting things going on here. It looks really fun, and these are all just basically complete sidetracks you can choose to run or not to run as a DM, and those two in particular are really fantastic for episode 3, which the players should be level 3 by, which is a great level to be doing a lot of this stuff in. Episode 4, when they actually track down Drawn Enterprises, they get to hop through a bunch of portals, which involve, in order to get to Drawn, you have to go through all these different portals, involving a lot of pirate motifs around Luskan, including One of them is a giant pirate fight against zombies, which is this one, another fantastic full-color detailed map that I absolutely love. And they literally just pop through like portal to portal, but they have to like cross these. Like one of them is they have to cross the rigging from one pirate ship to another, where there's all the pirates are firing crossbows at them. This one, the pirates are literally currently just in the middle of a giant fight with a bunch of zombies that the players just show up in. Like these are literally just bite-sized, crazy adventures that the players just pop into in their portal. So really, really fun sequence there. Episode 5 involves literally 3 insane things happening back to back. One of them is the players have to go steal one of their Ori pieces from a dwarven vault, and the best way to do that is to get body swapped into attendees of a dwarven wedding. And you can imagine all kinds of hilarious shenanigans can play out from there. This is also a gigantic map. There's like 100 dwarves in here, including iron golems guarding the way. There's a whole wedding itinerary set up, where the players have to basically sneak away and get to the vault room, answer a bunch of riddles and questions to get inside. And there they realize the final piece isn't there. Instead, they learn that the Ori itself was built by this lich named Lottie, who was worried about the powers and scattered it all over the area, which the players have been then picking up. And they get a note from her and a bunch of coins, which they realize are casino tokens, because of course the lich owns her own gambling den run by skeletons. Ah, it's so good. Another, I mean, you're just bouncing from memorable area to memorable area. By the way, to get from this location to the next one, the players have to get in a hot air balloon, where they are then attacked by Splurgoth and a bunch of his lackeys in this giant aerial battle in the skies, which is also absolutely amazing. But this is the gambling den map. Look at this. This is such a good map. There's skeletons like as the dealers at the vending machine. Oh my god, it's so good. It's so good. I love this. I love all of this. They can confront her, where she's like a Bond villain, just like sipping a glass of wine, and she sticks her giant clockwork beheader on the players they have to defeat. And then when they finally bust in, they realize that there's this giant round table full of liches. That's like a business meeting, because she's just hosting this like lich like retreat soiree. And the liches just kind of sit back and they're like, yeah, tell us what's going on. Let's just hear it out. And the players can basically plead their case like, hey, if these villains get the hands on all the things, it's going to be bad news for everybody. And they're like, yeah, okay. And they can basically get the final piece. It's so good. I love all of this. And then episode 6. So what's interesting here is that even though you're part of the Acq Inc. franchise, a lot of it you don't actually have to be in love or even be tangentially aware of Acq Inc. as a media for most of the adventure, which I think is really interesting. And that means that you don't have to be a fan of Acq Inc. to get the most out of this adventure. Now, it does front load some of the NPCs. You know, Omen is the quest giver. You'll see Viari like fills out the paperwork for you, and Phandalin. Jim Dark Magic shows up and can help you. You know, Morgaine, Walnut, all these different characters. And then at the very end is when the campaign really goes full bore and utilizes all of that that knowledge and plays with the pop culture references to Acq Inc. So if you don't know Acq Inc. up till now, you've been on board. I still think the adventure is really good and fun, but the conclusion, the finale, episode 6, may not be nearly as good if you're not an Acq Inc. fan, because the conclusion takes place in Red Larch, in the Drawn and Courtier, where you have the Splurgoth shrinks you down to like 6 inches. The giant like bodega cat Onyx like stalks you as like a chase sequence with this giant house cat. And yes, we do get a Drawn and Courtier map, and it is fantastically done. You can see there's literally rooms for Rosie, Dinar, Cathris, and Walnut, all set upstairs. Here's the back room, and there's the giant cat that can then stalk you, all the different characters that you recognize from Acq Inc. So if you don't know Acq Inc., this finale, I wouldn't say it was fall flags. I think it's still very well done. The villain's been very well done with the goblin who's just hellbent on destroying Acq Inc. and Omen and company. The players have to go through obviously all the different portals, because the Drawn and Courtier can teleport you around and have these different instances, which is an insanely cool thing from way back in the beginning of the C Team. There's a lot of really great references that are just stacked for the conclusion that mean a lot if you are an Acq Inc. fan. Probably don't mean as much if you aren't, but I think still come off as a really fun, memorable series of events that the players have to make it through before finally battling Splurgoth, and then like shades of the like A team, which is Jim, Morgaine, Omen, and Viari here at this giant um, finale arena. So I am almost breathless. It is such a good adventure. There's so much going on. I can't go through and like read out lines, but so much of just reading out character descriptions and dialogue had me laughing out loud. Like it is very much, if you enjoy Ack Inc., it is that. Like it is that level of humor and good characters and a good story, a good villain, just great game design. And the Ack Inc. obviously translates so well to D&D because they've been doing it for so long. I mean, Jerry has been a DM now for years and a player for years, and it's I'm so impressed. And as I said, I was already a fan of Ack Inc., so I was already predisposed to enjoy this. You know, I like Mike's art, I like all that stuff. But I was really, really blown away by just how well designed this adventure is. And yes, it's only level 1 through 6. Each episode is a milestone. So you're level 6 at the finale. Now that is longer than Phandelver in scope, breadth, and level. So Phandelver, you end it, the finale is at level 4, and you gain enough experience to get to 5. In this one, the finale is at 6, and you gain enough experience to reach 7 by the end. That still makes it a lot shorter than a full-bodied campaign that goes from like 1 through 12, like a Princes of the Apocalypse, Tomb of Annihilation, or Curse of Strahd, or the longer ones like the Out of the Abyss and Tyranny of Dragons and Dungeons of the Mad Mage, which even go up to the upper echelons of 15, 16, 17, maybe even up to 20. So I don't want to fault it for being shorter because I think that's part of the great game design, and part of the weakness of D&D is that I don't know how well it scales for those higher levels. I have no experience with tier 3 and higher tier 2 and tier 4 at all. Early tier 3, I guess. But by then the players basically saved the world and there's not much left for them to do, not much reason to adventure. So I think good adventures typically run tier 1 and tier 2, which the tiers, by the way, are like 1 through 5, 5 through 6 through 10, that kind of thing. And I think this is the best. I think it is the best low-level adventure that I've ever been through, that I've ever looked at, that I've ever read. I am super excited by all the possibilities of it, by the fact that it fits my players and my philosophy of how to run a D&D game so perfectly well that I would be thrilled to run this, with the only caveat being it would be a shorter campaign, even if you run all the extra bits. Certainly shorter than a bigger, like a Storm King's Thunder style campaign that overarcs a much longer career path. And the only reason that comes into play is because, and I don't usually comment on this, but it is priced like a full campaign adventure. It's a $49.95 adventure, which is the same as a Storm King's Thunder or all of those campaigns, versus Lost Mine of Phandelver, which is a shorter, bite-sized campaign, but is priced way, way cheaper at $14.99. So I don't know how well I can compare this to something like Phandelver, when Phandelver is meant to be a much shorter, smaller scope, whereas this one is, at least price-wise, meant to compare to the longer ones. And I think it's about half as long with everything that entails, half the career, maybe half the content and the maps and all that. But what is here is really, really damn good. And to me, that's worth getting, because it is simply just what looks like the most exciting, memorable adventure that I have seen in D&D 5th Edition. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Acquisitions Incorporated. Pro, the new franchise company position, downtime activities, and numerous role-playing player ideas and tables for each class. A lot of great content in the actual compendium. Pros, the Ori of the Wanderer adventure has excellent dungeon designs with a perfect mix of exploration, combat, and social encounters. The adventure features fun, interesting side treks, including breaking a doppelganger out of Neverwinter Prison and assisting with the mutiny on a ship, both the ones I went over. Pro, it has the trademark Ack Inc. humor and characters. You'll have to trust me on that, because I can't dive too far into that or this video will be forever long, but it is amazing. And Pro, full color grid maps for all major dungeons and locations. Yes! If we're going to have a Roll20 module, I want good maps. This has good, really good maps. Super thumbs up. Cons: it is light on new spells, races, monsters, and magic items. Do not expect a Xanathar's Guide to Everything level of content for player options. Instead, it's kind of, I would say it is 2/3 campaign book and 1/3 like Xanathar style player options. Which brings me to another con, is that it is a shorter, smaller adventure to other full-priced campaigns. It goes from 1 to 6. They should reach 7 by the end of the campaign. I still think it's an amazing campaign that's well worth the price. That's easy for me to say. I got a review copy, but seriously, incredible. But do note that it is not a full-on career like 1 through 11 or whatever the standard now is for a D&D 5th edition campaign. It is not that. It's probably about, glancing at it, it's probably about half the size of what you would expect from a full-priced campaign that is priced at this level. And the other con is Episode 2 reuses Phandalin in the entire Trezendar Manor dungeon from Lost Mine of Phandelver. And while I think it's a neat idea to return there, that just doesn't quite sit well with me, that it literally reuses the same dungeon design that those players go down into. And granted, things are a little bit differently, but I didn't quite like seeing that. I would have liked to see maybe explore a different area in Phandalin if you want to reuse it. Final verdict. Bursting with memorable moments, exotic locations, quirky characters, and trademark humor, the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure finally dethrones Lost Mine of Phandelver as the premier low-level 5th edition campaign adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my channel. Thank you.